What's up? My name is Ramon, and I used to teach martial arts for 6 years. I've noticed there's a lot of videos out there on different fighting styles, everything from boxing to Taekwondo, but there's not a lot of videos about a martial art that I love and practice called Pankration. And I'd like to change that. See, I first learned about Pankration when I was about 16, and I didn't find out about it through movies or TV or anything like that. I went to the library and I found a book about martial arts. But I didn't find it in the sports section. I found it in the archaeology section. And I would like to talk to you a little bit about the history of Pankration. See, Pankration in the myth was created by Hercules and Theseus. They, on their adventures, developed the style. But in actual history, a guy named Lycurgus at around 800 BC came back from exile into Sparta. Now, this isn't the Sparta that you know. This is a Sparta near Menelaon. And this Sparta was a agricultural and trade nation. They had grown soft and corrupt by the spoils of the Trojan War, or so the myth goes. And he wanted to make this nation great. So he moved them to the location where we would now think of as classical Sparta. And he introduced these reforms. And he also introduced ideas that he gathered along his exile. He also introduced the Helot slave system, but that's a different story. These ideas that he introduced were Cretan boxing, Greek wrestling, and Egyptian fencing, and he combined them into a single combat style, something that hadn't been done at that time period. And as Sparta grew and became stronger and more power militarily, the popularity of Pankration grew until all of Greece, and then later all of the Mediterranean, was practicing this style. Now, there were two styles that developed out of this. There was the Olympic sport version and the Spartan military combat version. The Spartan style, according to the Athenians, was brutal and savage and cruel. But the Olympic version was not exactly soft either. See, the Olympic version basically only added 3 major rules. 1, no eye gouging. 2, no biting. And 3, you could do this, which was to submit. That's it. That was the big difference in the rules. And Pankration became such a powerful fighting fighting style, that other nations wanting to be powerful militarily speaking, would then emulate Sparta and introduce Pankration into their military training. Alexander the Great is one of these people. And he, with the phalanx, would conquer all the way into the Middle East, what they called Asia. And what Pankration was at that time, well, have you ever gone to a martial arts class, or if you've ever seen a movie where they're doing basic training and you see the little formation and they're in lines? That's formation training. At least this type of formation training. We're not talking katas here. We're talking about just lining up in a row, fighting in rows. That's the drill and discipline Lycurgus introduced. So that gives you an idea of what the development of fighting was at that time. And when Alexander took this system, this drill system, into what they called Asia, in Persia, they conquered and they kicked ass. But the thing is that as Pankration grew and it changed and influenced other martial arts, it became more brutal and it became more savage. Or at least that's what the Romans would have you believe. The Romans had the gladiatorial games. Pankration entered the gladiatorial games. But even with the Olympics, even with the popularity of sport, when Rome, Imperial Rome at this point, would become Christian, they would ban all pagan festivals, all gladiatorial games, the Olympics, and Pankration. Hence, it disappeared from history. That's why most of you watching this video have never heard of Pankration before. But Pankration didn't disappear there. It was passed on father to son, just like swords and shields, as an art, as a craft, as a remembrance of why Greece was great. And this got continued on well into the Ottoman Empire, well into present day. And Pankration would have stayed secret, hidden, family-style martial art if it wasn't for historians and archaeologists reading ancient texts and seeing the word Pankration and wanting to know more. Now, the only thing they could find of any substance was sculptures and vases depicting Hercules and Theseus fighting with Pankration. Sure, they'd get a champion here, they'd get a story of a great hero who used the art, but they didn't have enough information to piece together a martial art until finally, reluctantly, they started to recognize these family styles and family traditions. But that still wasn't enough to give us a useful martial art, because the picture that formed was one of spears and leaf swords and shields. And these moves, these methods of fighting, were not useful on a street level. They weren't useful in a gym, and they definitely were not useful in a ring. So what happened is practitioners began to take bits and pieces from other martial arts to fill in the missing gaps. And then you had a complete martial art, but you still didn't have a sport. But at the same time that this was happening, another type of martial arts, MMA, was becoming popular. At the time, it was called underground fighting. And we're talking about the 60s and 70s now. So we've gone a whole span of history. And a guy named Jim Arvantes started saying that he's one of these guys with this secret family knowledge. And he started putting out there this style of sport pankration. And that's the pankration that I practice. Not Jim Arvantes' style, but this kind of hybrid version of different pieces of the actual history put together into a functional utilitarian version of the sport. But there's also a controversial part to pankration. See, like I said, Alexander brought it into the Middle East. And there are some historians who argue that it is pankration that influenced the precursors to classical Asian martial arts. And basically, the story goes like this. The successors of Alexander conquered and explored. And where they went, pankration followed. And this pankration, though it faded out of common knowledge and out of use, it influenced the military styles and military traditions of those cultures. And that is not something that's disputed. The armor that was used before the Greeks came in changed to Grecian and Hellenic armor. That's just what happened. When the Romans came in, the armor again changed to Roman-style armor. So there is no debate about the influence here. The problem is the time frame of these changes. Alexander the Great, you're talking somewhere around the 300s. When you get to Kung Fu, you're talking about maybe the 500s, maybe even as late as the 1700s. So you're talking about 1,000 years before Kung Fu was even a concept. And Kung Fu is considered the great-grandfather of all martial arts. So that's a little bit history of pankration, a little history of the difference between European martial art and a Asian martial art, and the reason why it's just not so popular. But if you want to learn about pankration, you do not have to do all this academic research. You can just watch a modern MMA fight. It's going to look about the same. Now the difference is, Pankration is a mixture of boxing and wrestling with a little bit of heel kicks and thrust kicks put in, while MMA is more Muay Thai and Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. So there is a difference. And again, the body types here are going to be different because all power, all strength. That's what the word Pankration means. And so you're talking about bodybuilders. You're talking about bulky, muscular bodies. You're not talking about skinny people. You're not talking about being fast or any of that kind of smooth motion, Bruce Lee type stuff. That's not what we're seeing here. So think HEMA, okay? Don't think Kung Fu, don't think karate. But it's still a martial art, and it's still legitimate. Again, but you got to look at the word martial art, meaning military science or military skill. Anyway, that's the first video. I hope you guys like it. I hope I make more, and I hope you watch.